The wine tasted wrong. Iris Blackwood noticed it the moment the crimson liquid touched her lips, a bitter undertone beneath the sweetness, something metallic that made her tongue curl. But she was seated at the head table of her own wedding feast, 500 wolves watching her every move, and her new husband's hand rested heavy on her thigh beneath the white tablecloth. She swallowed. Alexander Ironhold smiled at her, that charming smile that had won her father's approval and her pack's blessing. His dark eyes crinkled at the corners, and anyone watching would see a devoted groom gazing adoringly at his bride. Iris saw something else, something cold and calculating that she'd learned to recognize in the 3 months since their formal betrothal, though she'd never been able to name it. "Drink up, my love," he murmured, his fingers tightening on her thigh hard enough to bruise. "We're celebrating." She took another sip. The wrongness spread across her tongue, down her throat, and she felt the first flutter of unease in her stomach. Not the nervous butterflies of a new bride, something sharper, something that made her wolf stir restlessly in the back of her mind. "Something is wrong," her wolf whispered, but her wolf had been quiet for so long, suppressed by Alexander's dominance and her own desperate desire to make this mating work. Iris had learned to ignore that small voice. She would learn too late that she should have listened. The great hall of Ironhold Keep blazed with candlelight, hundreds of flames reflecting off silver platters and crystal goblets. The scent of roasted venison and fresh bread filled the air, mingling with the musk of too many wolves packed into one space. Iris's white gown, a confection of lace and silk that her mother had spent months embroidering with silver thread, pooled around her chair like fresh snow. She'd felt beautiful when she first put it on this morning. Now the bodice felt too tight, the fabric suddenly oppressive against her skin. "You're being foolish," she told herself, forcing another smile for the wolves who raised their goblets in toast after toast. "This is your wedding day. You should be happy." But happiness had become a foreign concept in the weeks since she'd discovered the truth growing inside her. She was pregnant. The palace healer had confirmed it just yesterday, her weathered hands gentle on Iris's still flat stomach as she delivered news that should have been joyous. A child, an heir. The continuation of the Ironhold line through his new mate. Iris had made the mistake of telling Alexander immediately. The memory of his face when she'd shared the news flashed through her mind now, how his expression had frozen, how something dark and dangerous had flickered in his eyes before he'd smoothed it away and pulled her into an embrace that felt more like a cage than a celebration. He'd held her so tightly she couldn't breathe, his lips pressed to her ear as he whispered, "Are you certain?" She'd been certain. Now, as the bitter taste of the wine spread through her body and the first cramp seized her abdomen, she was certain of something else entirely. Alexander. His name came out strangled, her hand flying to her stomach as pain lanced through her. Something's wrong. Something's... The second cramp doubled her over, and she heard the gasp ripple through the crowd as she knocked her goblet sideways, red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Like the blood she could suddenly feel, warm and wrong, soaking into the silk of her gown between her legs. "No," she breathed, pressing both hands to her belly as if she could hold her child inside through will alone. "No, no, no." "Guards!" Alexander's voice rang out, commanding, concerned. The perfect performance of a terrified husband. He was on his feet, his hand on her shoulder, and she looked up into his face and saw the truth. He wasn't surprised. The realization hit her like a physical blow, stealing what little breath she had left. His dark eyes held no shock, no confusion, no fear for her or their child. There was only cold satisfaction, quickly masked as he turned to face the assembled wolves. "My mate has been poisoned!" he roared, and the great hall erupted into chaos. But Iris saw his lips curve, just slightly, as the words left his mouth. She saw the way his fingers dug into her shoulder, not supporting, but restraining. She saw him glance toward the goblet she'd knocked over, checking to make sure the evidence was already spreading into the tablecloth, diluting into nothing. He did this. The thought crystallized through the pain, through the horrible cramping that told her body was trying to expel something it should have been protecting. Her mate, the wolf who had sworn before the moon goddess to cherish and protect her, had poisoned her wine to kill their child. Why? The word tore from her throat, barely audible over the shouting and the scraping of chairs as wolves surged to their feet. Alexander leaned down, his lips brushing her ear in a grotesque parody of intimacy. "Because I know what you are," he breathed, his voice silk over steel. "What that thing inside you would become. Did you really think I'd let you whelp a monster that could destroy everything I've built?" She didn't understand. She was nobody. An omega from a minor pack, chosen for her beauty and her bloodline's reputation for fertility. Nothing more. There was nothing special about her. Nothing threatening. Nothing. Another cramp ripped through her, and she screamed. The sound echoed off the stone walls, raw and animal, and she felt her wolf surge forward with a strength that surprised them both. But it wasn't enough. The poison was already in her blood, already doing its terrible work, and she felt consciousness beginning to slip away as her body convulsed. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Alexander's face above her, twisted into an expression of theatrical grief. "My poor, faithless mate," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She carries another's bastard and seeks to pass it off as mine. The shame of it has driven her to poison herself rather than face the truth." "Liar," Iris tried to say, but no sound came out. "Murderer, you're murdering our child." Then there was only darkness and cold and the distant sound of her wolf howling in grief. She woke to snow. It took her long moments to understand where she was, to process the white flakes falling on her face, the frozen ground beneath her body, the absolute silence of a winter forest at night. Her white gown was soaked through with blood and melted snow, the beautiful lace now a ruined shroud clinging to her shivering form. "Get up," her wolf urged, weaker than Iris had ever felt her. "Get up, or we die." Iris tried to move and whimpered at the pain that lanced through her abdomen. The cramping had stopped, which meant. She pressed a shaking hand between her legs and felt the sticky warmth of blood, already cooling in the winter air. Too much blood. Far too much blood for her child to have survived. The grief that washed over her was oceanic, drowning, absolute. She curled in on herself in the snow and sobbed, great racking cries that steamed in the frozen air and disappeared into nothing. Her child, her baby. Gone before she'd ever had the chance to feel it move, to sing to it, to imagine its face. "No," she keened, the word drawn out into a wail. "No. Please. No." But the moon goddess, if she was listening, offered no comfort. Time passed. Iris didn't know how much. Minutes or hours. It made no difference. The cold crept into her bones, numbing the pain in her body if not in her heart. The snow continued to fall, already beginning to cover her blood-stained gown, to fill in the hollow she'd made in the drift. She was going to die here. The thought held no fear, only a kind of distant relief. She would die, and she would never have to face Alexander again. Never have to see the triumph in his eyes or hear the lies dripping from his tongue. She would die, and she would be with her child, wherever wolves went when they finally stopped running. No. Her wolf's voice was barely a whisper, but there was steel in it. "He killed our pup. He threw us away like refuse. And you would let him win? You would let him tell his lies forever, make yourself into his victim for eternity. Get up, Iris Blackwood." The words pierced through the fog of grief and cold, igniting something in Iris's chest. Anger. Small at first, like the first spark of a fire, but growing. He had murdered her child. He had cast her out to die. He had stood before 500 wolves and called her faithless, called her baby a bastard, twisted every truth until it became a weapon, and she was just going to lie here and die? Iris planted her palms in the snow and pushed. It took 3 tries to get to her hands and knees, and twice more to stagger upright. The world spun around her, trees and snow and darkness whirling together into a nauseating blur. Blood ran down her thighs, hot against the frozen skin, and she knew with horrible certainty that she was still bleeding, that the poison had done damage her body couldn't repair without help. But she was standing. One step, then another. Her bare feet. They must have stripped her of shoes and cloak before dumping her, leaving nothing that might help her survive, sank into the snow, the cold so intense it almost felt like burning. The trees pressed close around her, their branches heavy with ice, and she had no idea which direction to go. Away, her wolf whispered. Just away. Find help. Survive. Asterisk. So Iris walked. She walked until her feet went numb, until she couldn't feel her fingers or her face, until every breath was a knife in her frozen lungs. She walked until the trees began to thin and the ground began to slope upward, until she crested a ridge and saw, in the distance, the faint glow of firelight. Territory boundary, her wolf said, and Iris felt a weak surge of hope. Someone else's territory. Not Ironhold, not his. She didn't care whose territory it was. She didn't care if they were enemies of her former pack. Didn't care if they killed her on sight. Anything was better than dying alone in Alexander's forest, her body becoming nothing more than a frozen monument to his cruelty. Iris stumbled down the ridge, fell, crawled, forced herself up again. The firelight grew closer, and she could see now that it came from torches, a border patrol, wolves in dark cloaks moving through the trees. She opened her mouth to call out, but no sound emerged except a thin wheeze. Louder, her wolf urged. Try again. Help, Iris managed, the word barely more than a breath. Please, help. She collapsed. The snow embraced her, soft and cold, and she thought distantly that this wasn't such a bad place to die after all. The torchlight was warm on her face even as the cold claimed the rest of her. She could hear shouts now, the sound of running feet, but it was all very far away, like a dream she was already forgetting. And then, hands on her body, large hands, impossibly warm, turning her over in the snow. A voice, deep and rough, swearing viciously as those hands found her bloody gown, her frozen skin. Get the healer, the voice commanded, and there was such absolute authority in it that Iris shivered with something other than cold. Now, and someone bring me a cloak. She's half dead already. She forced her eyes open. The face above her was all sharp angles and harsh beauty, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, a straight nose, lips pressed into a grim line. But it was his eyes that captured her attention and held it, even through the haze of cold and blood loss. They were amber, pure, liquid amber, like honey held up to firelight, and as she watched, they flickered. Changed. Burned suddenly with molten gold, bright as the sun. His hands tightened on her shoulders, and heat flooded into her body. Real heat. Impossible heat. As if she'd been plunged into a warm bath. Her wolf, dormant and dying, suddenly surged to life with a howl of recognition that echoed through Iris's entire being. Mate! Her wolf screamed. Ours! Impossible! Iris whispered, because she'd been mated already, bound to Alexander in a ceremony witnessed by the moon herself. You couldn't have 2 mates. It wasn't possible. But the man holding her had gone utterly still, his golden eyes wide with shock that mirrored her own. She watched his nostrils flare as he inhaled deeply, scenting her, and heard the low growl that rumbled from his chest. Mine. He breathed, the word rough and wondering and fierce all at once. The last thing Iris saw before consciousness fled was his face, beautiful and terrible and achingly familiar, though she'd never seen him before in her life. She saw his lips form a word, a name, a promise. She heard, as if from very far away, someone shouting, Alpha! Alpha King! What should we do? And then there was only darkness, and warmth, and the impossible feeling of coming home. Consciousness returned in fragments, shattered pieces of sensation that Iris couldn't quite fit together. Warmth first, impossible warmth after so much cold, wrapping around her like a cocoon. Then softness beneath her body, replacing the frozen ground that should have been her deathbed. And threaded through it all, a scent that made her wolf whimper with recognition. Pine and wood smoke, winter rain on stone. Something darker underneath, like the musk of a predator at rest. It filled her lungs with every shallow breath, and each inhale sent ripples of heat cascading through her broken body. Mate. Her wolf whispered again, the word reverent and desperate and terrified all at once. Iris forced her eyes open. The room swam into focus slowly, high ceilings lost in shadow, walls of gray stone softened by tapestries in deep crimson and gold. A fire blazed in an enormous hearth, casting dancing light across a space that was clearly meant for a king. The bed beneath her was vast, draped in furs so soft they felt like clouds against her ravaged skin. And beside her, close enough to touch, sat the man from the forest. He was watching her with those amber eyes, his expression unreadable. In the firelight, she could see what darkness had hidden before, the breadth of his shoulders beneath a simple linen shirt, the corded muscle of his forearms where he'd rolled his sleeves to the elbow, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead in disheveled waves. A scar traced the line of his jaw, silver white against tanned skin, and another disappeared into the collar of his shirt. He was beautiful, dangerous, and every fiber of her being was screaming that he was hers. "You're awake," he said, and his voice rolled through her like thunder, resonating in her chest and settling somewhere deep in her core. "The healer said you might sleep for days yet. You were nearly gone when we found you." Iris opened her mouth to respond, but all that emerged was a dry croak. Immediately he was moving, reaching for a cup on the bedside table, sliding one large hand beneath her shoulders to lift her just enough to drink. The water was cool and sweet, and she swallowed greedily until he pulled the cup away. "Slowly," he murmured. "Your body has been through hell. You need to go slowly." His hand was still beneath her shoulders, his palm pressed against her back through the thin fabric of the shift someone had dressed her in. Where his skin touched the cloth, she felt heat blooming outward, sinking into her muscles and chasing away aches she hadn't even registered. Her wolf rolled in the sensation, practically purring. "Who?" Iris had to stop, clear her throat, try again. "Who are you?" Something flickered in his expression. "You don't know?" She shook her head slightly, and the movement sent the room spinning. His arm tightened around her, steadying, and another wave of that impossible warmth flooded through the contact. "I am Marcus Wildfire," he said, and the name hit her like a physical blow. "Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and you, little wolf, collapsed at the border of my land soaked in blood and barely breathing." His jaw tightened, the muscle jumping beneath his scar. "You will tell me who did this to you, and then I will kill them." The Alpha King. Iris's mind raced even as her body remained languid and weak in his arms. She'd heard stories of Marcus Wildfire all her life, the warrior king who had united the fractured northern packs through blood and fire, who had crushed 3 separate rebellions before he turned 25, who ruled his territories with an iron fist and tolerated no threat to his people. He was said to be merciless, brutal, a monster in wolf's clothing. He was also, according to the mating bond that thrummed between them like a living thing, her true mate. "I don't understand," she whispered, and to her horror, she felt tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was already mated. I can't. This isn't." "Who?" The single word was a growl, his eyes flashing gold again. "Who claimed you?" "Alexander Ironhold." The name dropped into the space between them like a stone into still water. She watched Marcus's expression shift. Recognition first. Then something cold and calculating that reminded her uncomfortably of Alexander's eyes across the wedding table. "Ironhold," he repeated, and his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. The Ironhold Alpha poisoned you and left you to die in my forest. Not me. The words came out broken, shattered like her heart. My child. He poisoned the wine to kill my child. And then he told everyone I was faithless, that the baby wasn't his, that I'd poisoned myself from shame. A sob tore through her chest, and she couldn't stop it. Couldn't control the grief that came flooding back now that she was warm and safe and alive when her baby wasn't. He threw me out like garbage, like I was nothing, like our child was nothing. Marcus went very still. She felt it in every point of contact between them, the way his muscles locked, the way his breath stopped, the way even his heartbeat seemed to pause. His eyes burned brighter gold, and when he spoke, his voice was hardly human. He killed your pup. It wasn't a question. Iris nodded anyway, and the movement made her vision blur with tears. For a long moment, Marcus didn't move, didn't speak. The fire crackled in the hearth and shadows danced across the walls, and Iris felt the bond between them pulse with something dark and furious, an emotion so intense it made her gasp. Then, very carefully, he lowered her back against the pillows. His hand lingered on her shoulder for just a moment, his thumb tracing a gentle circle against her collarbone, and she shivered at the tenderness of it. Rest, he said, and his voice was controlled again, forcibly calm. The healer will return soon to check your wounds. You lost a great deal of blood. He rose from the bedside, and Iris felt the absence of his warmth like a physical ache. Wait, she said, reaching out to catch his wrist before she could think better of it. The moment her fingers closed around his skin, lightning struck. It arced between them, visible in the dim room, actual light, golden and bright, dancing where their flesh connected. Iris cried out, not in pain but in overwhelm, as sensation flooded through her. She felt him, not just his surface, but him. The essence of him, pouring into her through the point of contact, his strength, his fury, his loneliness, vast and deep and aching. And underneath it all, a thread of wonder so pure it made her want to weep. Mine, he breathed again, and this time the word was a vow. This isn't possible, Iris gasped, but she couldn't make herself let go. I was mated. The ceremony was witnessed. The moon knows what she's doing. Marcus turned, looked down at where her small hand gripped his wrist, and something in his expression softened. False bonds can be formed through ceremony and force of will, but they're not true mates. They're pale imitations at best. His free hand came up to cover hers, engulfing it in warmth. What you felt with Ironhold was never real. What you feel now, this is what the bond is supposed to be. Iris stared at him, this warrior king who was looking at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. Her wolf was whimpering in the back of her mind, urging her to pull him closer, to bury her face in his neck, and breathe him in until his scent replaced the phantom memory of Alexander's cologne. But she was broken, bleeding, a cast-off Omega with a dead child and a ruined body, and no matter what the mating bond said, she couldn't imagine why the Alpha King would want her. Why did you bring me here? She asked, her voice small. To your chambers instead of the healer's hall or a guest room or... Because you're mine. He said it simply, without hesitation, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. And what is mine, I protect. He gently disentangled his wrist from her grip, and she immediately missed the contact, the golden light fading as their skin separated. But he didn't go far, just moved to add another log to the fire, then returned to the chair beside her bed. Sleep, he said again, more firmly this time. We will talk more when you're stronger. I need to know everything about Ironhold's pack, his allies, his plans. His jaw tightened. And then I need to plan his death. Iris should have been frightened by the casual way he spoke of murder, but all she felt was a warm pulse of satisfaction from her wolf, a savage agreement that Alexander deserved exactly what Marcus was promising. She was too weak to fight the exhaustion pulling at her. Her eyes drifted closed, and the last thing she saw was Marcus settling back into the chair, his golden eyes fixed on her face like a guardian keeping vigil against the darkness. She slept. The fever came on the second day. Iris drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of little beyond the fire raging through her body and the cool cloths someone kept pressing to her forehead. She heard voices sometimes, a woman's brisk tones giving instructions, a deeper voice responding with barely controlled urgency. She felt hands on her, gentle despite their size, adjusting her position, spooning liquid past her cracked lips, tucking furs around her shivering form. And always, that scent. Pine and wood smoke, winter rain. Her mate never far from her side. Once, she surfaced long enough to see him arguing with someone in the doorway. A woman in healer's robes, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression frustrated. "Should be in the medical wing, my king. I cannot properly treat her here without—" "Then bring what you need." Marcus's voice brooked no argument. "She's not being moved. This is highly irregular." The healer's voice turned cold with disdain. "Wasting the king's chambers on some cast-off Omega. The servants say she was thrown out by her own mate for infidelity. Surely you have better uses for your time than nursing another pack's refuse." The growl that erupted from Marcus's chest shook the very stones of the walls. Iris felt it vibrate through her, through the mattress, through the air itself. The healer went pale and stumbled backward, her hand flying to her throat. "She is my mate," Marcus said, and each word was edged with razor-sharp fury. "The true mate I have searched for through 30 years and 100 battlefields. You will treat her as your queen, or you will leave my service today and never return. Choose." The healer chose wisely. Iris slipped back under before she could see more, but she carried the memory with her into her fevered dreams, the way Marcus had defended her, had claimed her before his own staff, had threatened his healer for daring to dismiss her as unimportant. No one had ever fought for her like that. Not her parents, who had been all too eager to trade her to Alexander's pack for political advantage. Not her former pack, who had turned their backs when Alexander named her faithless. She had spent her entire life being shuffled from hand to hand, a pretty piece on someone else's game board. And now this king, this stranger, this impossible mate, was ready to burn his own kingdom down rather than see her disrespected. She didn't know what to do with that. The fever broke on the third morning. Iris opened her eyes to find dawn light streaming through tall windows, painting the chamber in shades of rose and gold. Her head was clear for the first time since she'd collapsed in the snow, and while her body still felt weak as a newborn pup, the terrible cramping had stopped. The bleeding had stopped. She was alive. Movement caught her attention, and she turned her head to find Marcus still in the chair beside her bed. But he was slumped forward now, his head resting on his folded arms on the mattress beside her hip, his dark hair falling across his face. His breathing was deep and even, his features softened in sleep. He looked younger like this, less like the terrifying warrior king and more like a man exhausted past his limits. Without thinking, Iris reached out and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. Marcus came awake instantly, his hand catching her wrist in an iron grip before his eyes even opened. She gasped, and his gaze focused on her face, the amber irises flickering with gold before settling into something warmer. He released her immediately. "You're awake," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Truly awake this time. How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of elk," Iris admitted. "But alive. Thanks to you." He sat up, rolling his shoulders to work out the stiffness from sleeping hunched over her bed. She watched the play of muscle beneath his shirt and felt her wolf stir with interest. "I had hot broth brought up an hour ago," he said, nodding toward the bedside table where a covered bowl sat steaming gently. "You need to eat. Your body needs to rebuild its strength." Iris pushed herself up against the pillows, wincing at the ache in her abdomen. Marcus was beside her instantly, his arms supporting her back, adjusting the pillows until she was comfortable. I can... She started to protest, but he cut her off with a look. You can barely lift your head. Let me help you. She watched, bemused, as the Alpha King of the Northern Territories settled onto the edge of her bed, uncovered the bowl of broth, and lifted a spoonful to her lips. The liquid was rich with herbs and meat, soothing as it slid down her throat, and she hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first taste. You don't have to do this, she said between spoonfuls. Surely you have servants, or... I have an entire palace full of people who would be honored to serve you, Marcus agreed. But you are my mate. Your care is my responsibility, my privilege. His gaze held hers, steady and warm, as he lifted another spoonful. I will feed you with my own hands until you are strong enough to feed yourself, and I will consider it the greatest honor I have ever been given. Iris felt tears threatening again and blinked them back furiously. You don't even know me. I know you survived what should have killed you. I know you walked through a frozen forest on bleeding feet rather than surrender to death. I know that your wolf, even starved and suppressed and grieving, recognized mine the moment we touched. He set the bowl aside and took her hand in his, and the warmth that flowed between them made her breath catch. I know that I have waited my entire life for you, and I know that I will spend the rest of that life proving I am worthy of the gift the moon has given me. She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to reconcile this gentle, devoted man with the monster of legend she'd grown up hearing about. Didn't know how to trust that this was real, that he wouldn't turn on her like Alexander had, wouldn't hurt her the moment she let her guard down. But her wolf was purring in her chest, and his hand was warm around hers. And for the first time since she discovered her pregnancy, Iris felt something other than fear. Something warm uncurled in her chest, fragile and unfamiliar, after so long in the dark. The court whispered. Iris became aware of it as she grew stronger, as Marcus began helping her walk short distances around the chamber to rebuild her atrophied muscles. She heard voices in the hallways, saw servants duck their heads and scurry away when she and Marcus appeared. The maids who brought her meals had a way of looking at her that made her wolf bristle, pity mixed with contempt, as if she were some curiosity rather than a person. Rejected, Omega, she heard one of them mutter to another as they changed the linens. Carrying some other wolf's bastard and trying to pass it off. Can't believe the Alpha even let her across the border. Don't think she'll last long, the other replied. You know how he is. Once he realizes what she is, that's enough. Marcus's voice cracked through the room like a whip, and both maids spun around with twin expressions of terror. Iris hadn't even heard him enter, but there he was in the doorway, still dressed in the training leathers he'd worn to the practice yards that morning, his chest heaving with exertion and his eyes blazing gold. Out, he snarled. Both of you, report to the Chamberlain and tell him you've been dismissed from palace service. My king, You stood in my chambers and slandered my mate. He stalked forward, and the maids scrambled backward until they hit the wall. You repeated lies about her and her child as if they were common gossip. You looked at her with disgust while she lay recovering from a murder attempt. His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. Give me one reason why I shouldn't tear your throats out where you stand. Marcus? Iris's voice was soft, but it cut through his rage. He turned to look at her, and she saw the beast in his eyes, the wolf barely contained beneath his skin. Let them go. They're not worth it. For a long moment he didn't move. Then, with visible effort, he stepped back. Get out of my sight, he growled at the maids. If I ever hear either of you speak again, I will not be so merciful. They fled. Marcus watched them go, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his whole body vibrating with barely suppressed violence. Iris pushed herself up from the chair where she'd been resting and crossed the room to him, moving slowly, carefully, the way one would approach a wounded predator. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. I'm used to it. The whispers, the judgment, It matters. He turned to face her, and the gold was fading from his eyes, replaced by something raw and aching. It matters, Iris. Every word they say about you is a knife in my chest. Every look of contempt is an insult to my mate, my queen, the mother of... He stopped, swallowed hard, and she understood suddenly that his rage wasn't just about the maids or their cruel words. It was about what they'd referenced, what she'd lost. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough. "I'm sorry I couldn't save your child. I'm sorry I didn't find you sooner. I'm sorry that you had to suffer so much before you came to me." The tears Iris had been fighting for days finally broke free. She didn't sob. She was too weak for that, too drained. But the tears slid down her cheeks in silent streams, and Marcus gathered her against his chest with a gentleness that shattered something inside her. "You didn't know," she whispered against his shirt. "You couldn't have known. This isn't your fault." "No, but Ironhold will pay for it nonetheless." His arms tightened around her, and she felt his cheek press against the top of her head. "I swear it on my life, Iris. I swear it on my throne and my pack, and every victory I have ever claimed. He will suffer for what he did to you, and then he will die screaming." She should have been frightened by the violence in his promise, but standing in the circle of his arms, her wolf settled into a quiet contentment she hadn't felt in years. The constant vigilance, the endless watchfulness. It loosened its grip, just slightly. For the first time in years, she could breathe. "Come," Marcus said finally, pulling back just enough to look at her face. His thumb brushed away her tears with impossible tenderness. "You need to rest. The healer says you're healing well, but you shouldn't push too hard." He led her back to the bed, helped her settle against the pillows, and then, to her surprise, climbed in beside her. "What are you—" "Shh." He pulled her against his side, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. "I've spent 3 nights sleeping in that damn chair. My back is in knots. You're going to let me hold you while you rest, and we're both going to sleep properly for once." Iris opened her mouth to protest, but her wolf was already curling up contentedly in the back of her mind, soothed by their mate's presence. And truthfully, she didn't want to protest. She wanted this. The warmth of him, the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath her ear, the knowledge that he was here, that he wasn't going to leave, that he would fight anyone who tried to hurt her. She had spent so long being afraid, being careful, being small and quiet and invisible, trying to avoid Alexander's temper, trying to be the perfect mate he demanded. With Marcus, she didn't have to be perfect. She just had to be. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes already growing heavy. "For saving me, for protecting me, for everything." His lips brushed against her hair. "I would burn the world for you, Iris Blackwood, and I would count it a blessing if you only asked." She fell asleep in his arms, the mate bond humming between them like a lullaby. And outside, the first winter storm of the season began to rage, as if the world itself was preparing for the battle to come. The storm raged for 3 days. Iris drifted in and out of consciousness, her body finally surrendering to the healing it desperately needed. Each time she woke, Marcus was there. Sometimes reading reports by candlelight. Sometimes staring out the frost-covered windows at the howling white beyond. Sometimes simply watching her with an expression that made her heart ache with its naked tenderness. On the second day, she woke to find him gone, and the panic that seized her chest was immediate and devastating. She sat up too quickly, her vision swimming, her wolf howling with sudden distress. The mate bond stretched thin and painful in his absence, and she found herself gasping for breath, her hands fisting in the sheets as she fought against the irrational terror that he had left her. That she was alone again, that everything had been a fever dream, and she was still dying in the snow. The door burst open. Marcus stood in the threshold, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing gold. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, and she realized with distant shock that she was sobbing. Great, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. I'm here. He breathed against her hair. I'm here, Iris. I'm sorry. I had to meet with my generals. I should have left word. I didn't think. I woke up, and you were gone. Her voice was muffled against his chest, her fingers clutching his shirt like a lifeline. I don't know what I thought. I know. His arms tightened around her. I felt it. Through the bond. I felt your fear, and I came running so fast I nearly knocked over 3 servants and a visiting dignitary. A rough laugh escaped him. Lord Ashworth will never forgive me for trampling his ceremonial robes. Despite everything, Iris found herself laughing too. A weak, watery sound that surprised them both. She pulled back just enough to look at his face, at the genuine worry carved into his features, at the way his jaw was still clenched with residual tension. You felt my fear, she repeated slowly, through the bond. I feel everything. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing gentle arcs across her cheekbones. Your fear, your pain, your moments of peace. When you dream, I dream with you. When you hurt, I hurt with you. The bond is stronger than anything I've ever experienced. Stronger than anything my scholars can explain. Something flickered in the depths of his eyes. Not just wonder, but something more complicated. Something like recognition. Marcus? She searched his face. What is it? He hesitated, and she saw the moment he decided to tell her the truth rather than shield her from it. The head scholar came to see me this morning. That's partly why I left. I wanted to speak with her privately. Before. He took a breath. She's been researching your bloodline, Iris. Your family history. She found something. The cold that crept into Iris's chest had nothing to do with the storm outside. What did she find? Your mother's maiden name was Silverbane. The name struck something deep in Iris's memory, her grandmother's voice, soft and strange, singing lullabies about silver moons and starlight crowns. The way her mother had always flinched when grandmother spoke of the old blood and the power that sleeps. Iris had thought it was senility. Now she wasn't sure. Silverbane, she repeated slowly. My grandmother used to. She said things, sometimes, about blood and moons and sleeping power. We thought she was confused. She wasn't confused. Marcus's voice was quiet, reverent. Silverbane was the name of the ancient lunar queens, the first rulers of our kind, before the pack splintered and the kingdoms rose. They were said to possess the pure essence of the moon goddess herself, the ability to give and take the wolf spirit, to heal or destroy with a touch, to command the very tides of power that flow through our blood. Iris stared at him. That's a legend. A children's story. The lunar queens died out centuries ago. The direct line died out. But the blood. He traced his fingers down her arm, his touch feather-light. The blood can sleep for generations, hiding in the offspring of lesser branches, waiting for the right conditions to awaken, waiting for a catalyst. A catalyst. Iris repeated numbly. Extreme trauma, near death, and a mate bond powerful enough to shake the very foundations of the soul. Marcus's eyes never left hers. You are not just any wolf, Iris Blackwood. You carry the blood of queens in your veins, and somewhere deep inside you, that power is beginning to wake up. She wanted to deny it. She wanted to laugh and call it madness. Call it the desperate imaginings of scholars who spent too much time with dusty books and not enough time in the real world. But even as the denial rose to her lips, she felt something stir in her chest. Something vast and silver and ancient. Something that had been sleeping her entire life and was only now, slowly, beginning to open its eyes. That's why, she whispered. That's why, Alexander. The words died in her throat as understanding crashed over her like a wave. Marcus nodded grimly. I believe so. Whatever he discovered about your bloodline, whatever he learned about the power you carry, it threatened him. You were never just an unwanted mate to him, Iris. You were a threat. A threat he tried to eliminate before you could ever realize what you truly are. The baby. The poison. The calculated cruelty of casting her into the snow to die alone. It had never been about her supposed infidelity. It had never been about the child not being his. Alexander had known exactly what he was doing when he poured that poison into her wine. He had been trying to kill a queen before she could claim her crown. He'll come for me. The certainty settled into her bones like ice. When he learns I survived, he'll come for me. Let him. Marcus's voice was velvet over steel. Let him come to my doorstep and try to take what is mine. I will tear him apart with my bare hands and mount his head on a pike outside my gates, as a warning to any who would dare. No. Iris caught his face between her hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me, Marcus. Alexander isn't just a jealous former mate, he's a schemer, a manipulator. He's been building alliances for years, cultivating power in the shadows while everyone underestimated him. If he poisoned me because of what I am, then he has plans beyond just eliminating a threat. He wants something. Marcus's jaw tightened. My throne. Your throne. Your kingdom. Everything. The pieces were clicking together in her mind now, patterns she'd been too blind to see when she was living in the middle of them. He married me for political alliance. My father's pact controls the southern trade routes. But sometime after the betrothal, he must have discovered what I truly am. His healer, perhaps, or one of his spies. He realized any child I bore would carry the lunar bloodline, power he could never fully control. He wanted to use it through our offspring. But something changed. Something made him decide to kill me instead of use me. He discovered he couldn't control you. Marcus's voice was soft with realization. Your wolf. It never submitted to him. Not truly. Even when he thought he'd broken you, even when you believed yourself to be the perfect, obedient mate, some part of you was always resisting. Iris thought of the years she'd spent in Ironhold territory, the way she'd learned to make herself small, invisible, harmless, the way she'd swallowed her opinions and her desires and her very self, trying to be what Alexander demanded. And beneath it all, the constant, quiet hum of defiance that she'd never been able to fully silence. He couldn't risk me awakening, she said slowly. Couldn't risk me discovering what I was and turning that power against him. So he decided to end me before I became too dangerous. And when he learns you're here, under my protection, with the mate bond already forming between us. Marcus's expression hardened. He'll come. Not just for you, but for both of us. Because together, we're everything he fears. The wind shrieked against the windows, and Iris shivered despite the warmth of the fire. Somewhere out there in the storm, Alexander was plotting, scheming, preparing to strike, and she was still so weak. I can't even shift, she whispered. My wolf is there. I can feel her, but she's damaged, broken. The poison did something to her. She'll heal. Marcus pulled her closer, his warmth surrounding her like a shield. You'll heal, and I will keep you safe until you do. But no. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me, Iris. You are not alone anymore. You are not some discarded mate struggling to survive in a world that wants you dead. You are the mate of the Alpha King, and you carry the blood of the Lunar Queens, and when Alexander comes, and he will come, we will face him together. Do you understand? The conviction in his voice was absolute, unshakable, and despite everything, despite the terror clawing at her chest and the weakness still pulling at her limbs, Iris felt something inside her respond, something fierce and bright and hungry. Together, she repeated, together. He pressed his forehead to hers, their breath mingling in the space between them. Now rest. Let your body heal. Let your wolf recover. When the storm breaks, there will be work to do. But for now, you are safe in my arms, and nothing in this world or any other will change that. She let him guide her back down to the pillows, let him wrap himself around her like a living blanket. And as the storm continued to rage outside, Iris allowed herself to close her eyes and believe, for the first time in longer than she could remember, that she might actually survive this. That she might actually be strong enough to face what was coming. The storm broke on the morning of the fourth day. Iris stood at the window of Marcus's chambers, watching the clouds part to reveal a sky of such pristine, aching blue that it hurt to look at. The snow lay thick and white across the castle grounds, transforming the world into something out of a fairy tale, all sharp contrasts and glittering surfaces. She was stronger now. Still not fully healed, still not able to shift, but strong enough to stand without support. Strong enough to eat solid food without her stomach rebelling. Strong enough to feel the first stirrings of hope beneath the fear that had become her constant companion. You should still be in bed. She didn't turn at Marcus's voice, but she smiled at his reflection in the glass. He stood in the doorway, dressed in the formal attire of an alpha king, black leather and silver embroidery, his crown a simple circlet of dark metal that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less. I needed to see it, she said. The world. I've been trapped inside my own head for so long, I almost forgot what beauty looked like. He crossed the room to stand behind her, and when his arms wrapped around her waist, she leaned back into him without hesitation. It felt natural now, this easy intimacy between them. The mate bond hummed with contentment at the contact, and she felt her wolf stir sleepily in response. Beauty, Marcus murmured against her hair, is standing in my arms, looking at snow. Flatterer. Truth-teller. His lips brushed against her temple. I have court in an hour. Petitions to hear, disputes to settle. The business of ruling never stops, even when I would rather spend the day right here with you. Then go. She turned in his arms, looking up at his face. I'll be fine. I can entertain myself. I've assigned you a personal guard, just for today until I can… Marcus. She pressed a finger to his lips. I understand. Go. Be the king your people need. I'll still be here when you return. The look he gave her was complex. Gratitude and worry and something deeper. Something that made her breath catch in her throat. Then he leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead, soft and lingering. If you need me, he said, reach through the bond, call for me. I will come. I know. He left, and Iris turned back to the window, watching his figure appear moments later in the courtyard below. Even from this distance, she could see the way the servants and guards straightened at his approach, the way people moved aside to let him pass. He walked like a man who had never known fear, who had never doubted his place in the world. She wondered what that felt like. The knock at the door came an hour later. Iris looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read, a history of the northern territories that she'd found on Marcus's shelf, to find a young woman in servant's livery standing in the doorway. Begging your pardon, my lady, the girl said, bobbing a curtsy. There's a messenger arrived at the gates. He carries a letter for you, specifically. He says he'll only give it into your hands. Iris's blood ran cold. A messenger? From where? Ironhold territory, my lady. For a moment, Iris couldn't breathe. The book slipped from her fingers, landing on the floor with a muffled thump. Ironhold. Alexander. He knew she was here. He knew she was alive. The Alpha King, she started, is in the Great Hall, my lady, with the full court in attendance. It would take some time to reach him. Of course Alexander would time his message for when Marcus was occupied. Everything was calculated with him, every move designed to maximize his advantage. Where is the messenger? In the entrance hall, my lady, under guard. Iris stood, her hands shaking despite her best efforts to steady them. She should wait for Marcus. She should send word and let him handle this. Let him protect her the way he'd promised. But some part of her, the part that had never fully submitted, the part that Alexander had tried so hard to break, refused to hide, refused to cower. If her former mate had sent a message, She would receive it herself. Take me to him. The entrance hall was vast and cold, marble floors stretching beneath a ceiling painted with scenes of ancient wolf hunts. The messenger stood in the center of the room, flanked by two of Marcus's guards. He was a small, weasel-faced man Iris recognized, one of Alexander's personal servants, the kind who saw everything and said nothing. "My lady." He bowed, and the mockery in the gesture was barely concealed. "My master sends his regards." "Your master tried to kill me." Iris kept her voice steady through sheer force of will. "His regards are unwelcome." Nevertheless, the messenger produced a sealed envelope from his coat, the wax stamped with the Ironhold crest. "He insisted I deliver this personally and wait for your response." Iris took the letter with fingers that only trembled slightly. The paper was heavy and expensive, the kind Alexander always used for official correspondence. As if the weight of the stationery could lend weight to his lies, she broke the seal and unfolded the paper. "My dear Iris, I trust this letter finds you recovered. I must admit, I was surprised to learn of your survival. Winter storms can be so unpredictable, and you were always such a delicate creature. But it seems you found warmth after all, in the arms of the Alpha King himself. How very convenient. I'm sure he's told you all manner of sweet things by now. Promises of protection, declarations of devotion, vows of vengeance against the mate who wronged you. He's quite good at that. The grand romantic gesture. It's how he keeps his kingdom in line, you know, making everyone believe he's the noble hero of the story. But you and I know the truth, don't we, my dear? We know what you really are. The moon goddess was clever when she created the mate bond. That pull, that irresistible attraction, it makes us forget ourselves, makes us believe in love at first sight, in destiny, in forever. But it's just biology, Iris, just hormones and instinct, dressed up in pretty words. What you feel for Marcus Wildfire isn't real. It can't be real, because you already had a mate. Me. The bond we shared may be broken, but its ghost still lingers. Every time he touches you, you'll think of me. Every time he whispers in your ear, you'll hear my voice. I'm coming for you, Iris. Not to kill you. I've realized that was a mistake. You're far too valuable to waste. That power in your blood, that ancient legacy you don't even understand, it belongs to me. You belong to me. Tell the Alpha King that I'll be arriving at his court in 3 days' time to formally request the return of my mate. I have the law on my side. You were still legally bonded to me when you left Ironhold territory, which makes you my property under the old treaties. He can fight me, of course, but if he does, he'll be breaking centuries of precedent, and every pack in the realm will question his judgment. Or he can give you back willingly, and I'll forget this little indiscretion. Choose wisely, my dear, for both your sakes, your devoted mate, Alexander." The letter shook in Iris's hands. Then it burst into silver flames. She hadn't meant to do it. The fire erupted from her palms without conscious thought, consuming the paper in a flash of heat and light. The messenger stumbled backward with a cry, and the guards drew their weapons, and Iris stood in the center of it all with her hands still burning silver, her eyes wide with shock. "What?" She stared at her palms, at the flames licking harmlessly across her skin. "How?" "The power is waking." The voice came from inside her, from the place where her wolf dwelt. But it wasn't her wolf speaking. It was something older, something vaster, something that had been sleeping for generations and was finally beginning to rise. "He awakened us with his cruelty, and now we will never sleep again." The flames died as suddenly as they'd appeared, leaving Iris gasping for breath, her legs threatening to give out beneath her. The messenger was cowering against the far wall, his face white with terror, and even the guards looked shaken. "Tell your master," Iris said, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears, deeper, resonant with power she didn't understand, "that his property is no longer his concern. Tell him the Alpha King has claimed me as his mate, And any challenge to that claim will be met with fire and blood. Tell him. She paused, feeling the ancient power settling into her bones like starlight, like a crown she hadn't known she was born to wear. Tell him the Lunar Queen has awakened, and she is not afraid. The messenger fled. Iris stood alone in the entrance hall, staring at her hands, feeling the impossible power thrumming through her veins, and wondered what she had just unleashed upon the world. The door burst open behind her. Iris! Marcus was there, his crown askew, his eyes wild with concern. He must have felt it through the bond, the surge of power, the shock, the fear. What happened? Are you... He's coming. Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be. Alexander. He's coming in 3 days. Marcus's expression hardened into something cold and deadly. Then we have 3 days to prepare. No. Iris turned to face him fully, and she saw his eyes widen as he took in whatever changes the awakening power had wrought in her. We have 3 days to teach me how to use whatever this is, because when he comes, Marcus, I am going to be the one to face him. Iris? He poisoned me. He killed our child. He threw me into the snow to die. The silver fire flickered at her fingertips, responding to her anger. This is my fight. My vengeance. And with the moon goddess as my witness, I am going to end him. Marcus stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, fierce and proud and burning with love. There she is, he murmured. There's my queen. The 3 days passed in a blur of training and preparation. Marcus brought in the oldest wolves of his court, the ones who remembered the stories of the Lunar Queens, who had seen with their own eyes what that ancient bloodline could accomplish. They taught Iris to channel the silver fire, to shape it with her will, to let it flow through her without burning away everything she was. It was not easy. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. The power was vast, vaster than anything she had ever imagined dwelling inside her small, battered body. It raged against her control like a wild river, threatening to sweep her away with every attempt to harness it. The first day, she couldn't summon the fire at all. The second day, she summoned it, but couldn't stop it. She burned through 3 training rooms, melted a set of ancient armor that had stood in the Great Hall for centuries. The Chamberlain had wept. Marcus had promised to commission a replacement. And once, in a moment of particular frustration, set Marcus's favorite cloak on fire while he was still wearing it. He had only laughed, shrugging off the smoldering fabric and pulling her into his arms. You're magnificent, he'd murmured against her hair. Terrifying, but magnificent. The old wolves warned her that true mastery would take years, perhaps decades. The Lunar Queens of old had trained from childhood, learning to wield their power the way warriors learn the sword. Iris had 3 days and a lifetime of suppression to overcome. You're drawing from maybe 1/10 of what sleeps inside you, the eldest trainer told her on the second night, her ancient face grave. Perhaps less. Push too hard, too fast, and the power will consume you before you can use it. Then teach me to use that 1/10, Iris had replied. Teach me to survive. By the morning of the 3rd day, she had learned enough to be dangerous. Not controlled. The power still bucked against her like a wild horse. Not refined, her flames were blunt instruments where they should have been surgical tools, but dangerous. And sometimes, Iris thought grimly as she watched the sun rise over the snow-covered mountains, dangerous was enough. Alexander arrived with the noon bells. He came not with an army, but with a retinue of 40 wolves in polished armor, their banners snapping in the wind. It was a statement, Iris realized. A diplomatic show of force, enough to intimidate, but not enough to threaten open war. He expected Marcus to see the political cost of refusal and hand her over without resistance. He was gambling that the Alpha King wouldn't risk a war with the Southern Territories over a single Omega. The arrogance of it made her teeth ache. She stood at Marcus's side on the great steps of the palace, dressed not in the borrowed gowns of a guest, but in the silver and black of the Wildfire Pack. His colors, his house, his mate. The crown on her head was delicate, woven of moonstone and silver filigree, and it pulsed faintly with the power that had awakened in her blood. Alexander's expression when he saw her was almost worth the 3 days of terror that had preceded this moment. "Well," he said, dismounting from his horse with a grace that had once made her heart flutter. Now it only made her stomach turn. "This is unexpected. I'd heard you were playing at being queen, but I didn't think he'd actually put you in the costume." "Alexander," Marcus's voice was ice, "you were warned what would happen if you came here." "I was invited here, actually." Alexander smiled that charming, terrible smile. "The old treaties are clear. A mate bond supersedes territorial claims. She belongs to me, Wildfire. I'm simply here to collect her." "The bond is broken." Iris was surprised by how steady her voice emerged. "You broke it when you poisoned me, when you killed our child, when you threw me into the snow to die." Something flickered in Alexander's blue eyes. Annoyance, perhaps, or calculation. "A regrettable misunderstanding. I was deceived by false reports of your infidelity. Surely you can find it in your heart to forgive a jealous mate's momentary lapse in judgment?" Momentary lapse. Light sparked at her fingertips, pale and cold as a moonlight, and she didn't bother to suppress it. "You watched me bleeding on the floor of our wedding feast and you called me a whore." "I was wrong. I've come to make amends." He spread his hands in a gesture of supplication, but his eyes never lost their predatory gleam. "Come home with me, Iris. Let me show you how sorry I am. Let me prove that I can be the mate you deserve." "She already has a mate." Marcus stepped forward, and the power rolling off him was enough to make the wolves in Alexander's retinue shift nervously. One who would never raise a hand against her. One who would burn the world before allowing her to come to harm. Ah, yes, the famous Alpha King and his legendary devotion. Alexander's lip curled. "Tell me, Wildfire, do you actually believe this farce? She was bonded to me for 3 years. Whatever you think you feel for her is just echoes of what she and I shared." "What we shared," Iris said quietly, "was nothing compared to this." She felt the mate bond pulse between her and Marcus, felt his fierce love and his burning rage and his desperate fear for her safety. She felt her own emotions flowing back to him, her determination, her fury, her absolute certainty that she would never, ever let Alexander touch her again. "Enough of this," Alexander snapped, and all pretense of civilized negotiation vanished from his face. "You have something I need, Iris. That power in your blood. It should have passed to our child, to an heir I could control. Instead, you survived, and now it's awake, and I need it." "So the poisoning wasn't about jealousy at all," Iris said. "It was about power. It was always about power." "Of course it was about power. Everything is about power." He took a step toward her, and the wolves at his back surged forward. "Give yourself to me willingly, and I'll let your little king live. Resist, and I'll kill everyone in this palace and take you anyway." "You invoke the old treaties," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "But those same treaties are clear on one point. A mate bond dissolved through attempted murder carries no legal weight. You poisoned her. You tried to kill her, and your own child. By the laws you claim to uphold, you have no rights here, only the mercy of this court, which you will not receive." Alexander's face contorted with rage. The diplomatic gambit had failed. His legal standing had crumbled. All that remained was violence. The attack came without further warning. Alexander's wolves lunged forward, their forms blurring as they shifted mid-leap. Marcus's guards rushed to meet them, and suddenly the great steps of the palace were a chaos of snarling bodies and flashing claws. Iris felt Marcus's hand close around her arm, trying to pull her back to safety, but she planted her feet and refused to move. "Iris, please." "No." She watched Alexander moving through the battle, his own wolf form massive and black, cutting through Marcus's guards like they were made of paper. "No more running." The silver fire erupted from her palms. It wasn't controlled, wasn't refined. It was raw and wild and furious, and it swept across the battlefield like a wave, knocking wolves off their feet, sending Alexander's forces tumbling backward. The power sang in her veins, ancient and terrible and utterly right, and Iris felt her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind. Those strange lullabies, those cryptic warnings about sleeping power, finally making sense. Blood of the moon, daughter of stars, the power is yours by right and by birth. Speak the words, and no wolf shall stand against you. I am the daughter of the lunar queens, Iris said, and her voice resonated with power that shook the very stones beneath their feet. I am the blood of the moon, the vessel of starlight, and I will not be claimed. Alexander's black wolf skidded to a halt before her, his eyes wide with something that might have been fear. Then he shifted back to human form, standing naked and defiant in the falling snow. Pretty words, he snarled, but words won't save you. I know things about your bloodline that you don't, little queen. That power is unstable. Use too much of it, and it will burn you alive from the inside. Then let it burn. She stepped forward, and the power intensified, wrapping around her like a living thing, lifting her hair in a corona of pale radiance. She felt the power straining against the fragile boundaries of her body, felt it pressing against her skin like something trying to break free, and she welcomed it. Your child would have been so much easier to control, Alexander continued, circling her like a wolf stalking prey. A baby, raised from birth to serve my purposes, never knowing what it truly was. But you're unpredictable, dangerous. Every moment you live with that power awake, you become more of a threat to everything I've built. Good. Iris's voice was steady, even as the fire climbed higher. Be threatened. He lunged at her. Iris didn't flinch. She raised her hands, and the silver fire exploded outward, catching him mid-leap, wrapping around him like chains of liquid moonlight. He screamed, a sound she had never heard him make before, a sound of pure terror, and she felt the ancient power reaching into him, finding the wolf that lived beneath his skin. You don't know what you're doing, he gasped, writhing against the silver bonds. Stop. Please. I'll leave. I'll never bother you again. Just stop. You killed my child. Iris stepped closer, and her voice was the voice of something far older than herself. You watched me bleed on the floor of our wedding feast, and you smiled. You threw me into the snow to die, and you slept soundly that night, knowing I was freezing to death. I was wrong. I admit it. I was wrong. You were not wrong. The power surged through her, and she felt it reaching into the very core of him, finding the wolf that was the source of his strength. You were exactly what you always were, a monster wearing the face of a man. She spoke the words her grandmother had taught her, hidden in those strange lullabies she'd sung when Iris was small, words that had been passed down through generations of lunar queens for precisely this purpose. By the blood of the moon and the light of the stars, I strip from you that which was never truly yours. By the power of our mothers and the judgment of the goddess, I declare you unworthy of the wolf's blessing. Alexander screamed. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of something being torn apart, something fundamental being ripped from the very essence of his being. The light flared blinding white, and when it faded, Alexander lay crumpled on the blood-stained snow, small and broken and utterly, terrifyingly human. My wolf, he whispered, his voice cracked and hollow. What did you do to my wolf? I took it. Iris was shaking now, the power receding like a tide, leaving her exhausted and wrung out. The way you took everything from me. She heard Marcus approaching behind her, felt his hand settle warm and steady on her shoulder. His presence anchored her, kept her from collapsing as the last of the silver fire faded from her veins. You should have let me die in that snow, she said, looking down at the pathetic creature that had once been her mate. If you had left me alone, if you had simply let me disappear, I would never have found Marcus. I would never have awakened. You would have had your little kingdom and your petty schemes, And I would have been nothing but a frozen corpse on the mountain. Alexander spat at her feet. You are nothing. You are nothing. A broken Omega, playing at power she doesn't understand. When the other packs hear what you've done, stripping a bonded wolf from an alpha, they'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. They'll do nothing of the kind. Marcus's voice was cold as the winter wind. Because they'll never hear of it. Because you'll never have the chance to tell them. He hauled Alexander up by the throat, his claws extending, his eyes burning gold with fury. The former alpha dangled from his grip like a rag doll, all his power, all his arrogance, reduced to this pathetic wolfless creature. She is my mate, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the silent battlefield. My queen. And you are nothing but a memory she will never have to fear again. His claws tore through Alexander's throat in one savage motion. Blood sprayed across the snow, crimson against white, and the body crumpled to the ground at Iris's feet. She stared down at it, waiting for something. Grief, perhaps? Or guilt? Or some remnant of the bond they had once shared? She felt nothing but relief. Marcus turned to her, his hands still stained with Alexander's blood, his expression raw with triumph and something deeper, a devotion that made her heart ache. Iris, my mate, my queen. She swayed on her feet, and he caught her before she could fall, sweeping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. Around them, the remains of Alexander's retinue were surrendering, throwing themselves at the feet of the wildfire guards, begging for mercy they did not deserve. Iris buried her face in Marcus's neck and let the tears finally come. They retreated to his chambers as the sun set. The aftermath of the battle was in other hands now. His generals, his advisors, the countless people who made a kingdom run. For these few hours there was only the two of them, and the bond that hummed between them like a living thing. Marcus had bathed the blood from his hands, and now he sat beside her on the great bed, his fingers gentle as they traced the curve of her cheek. You are magnificent, he murmured, terrifying and glorious and utterly magnificent. I almost couldn't control it. Her voice was still hoarse from crying. The power. It wanted to burn everything. It wanted to reduce him to ash and keep going until there was nothing left. But you didn't. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. You controlled it. You chose mercy, even for him. A quick death instead of the slow torture he deserved. I didn't do it for him. She met his eyes, those amber depths that had become her anchor, her home, her reason for surviving. I did it because I didn't want to become what he was. I didn't want to lose myself to vengeance. You could never lose yourself. His hand curved around the back of her neck, warm and possessive and achingly tender. You are the strongest person I have ever known, Iris Blackwood. Stronger than me, stronger than any alpha, stronger than the power that flows in your blood. She reached up to touch his face, tracing the sharp line of his jaw, the curve of his lips. The mate bond pulsed between them, demanding something, calling for completion, and she knew what came next. What had to come next? For them to be truly, fully bound. Marcus. Her voice was barely a whisper. Will you mark me? His eyes flared gold, his wolf rising to the surface at her words. Are you certain? After everything. The first bond, the betrayal. That wasn't a true bond. She was certain of this now, certain in a way that left no room for doubt. What Alexander and I had was obligation and expectation and the trap my parents sold me into. This. She pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heart thunder beneath her touch. This is real. This is what the mate bond is supposed to be. Iris. His voice broke on her name. I would have waited. I would have given you all the time you needed. I don't need time. She pulled him down to her, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was equal parts tenderness and demand. I need you. I need to be yours, truly and completely. He groaned against her mouth, his control fraying at the edges. If I start this, I won't be able to stop. The wolf, the bond. Then don't stop. His hands were shaking as he lowered her to the pillows, his body covering hers with a warmth that chased away the last of the cold that had lived in her bones since the night Alexander cast her out. He kissed her throat, her collarbone, the curve of her shoulder, and she felt his teeth grazing her skin, not biting, not yet, but promising. "You are sure?" he asked again, and the tremor in his voice undid her. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." His fangs sank into the junction of her neck and shoulder. Pain flared first, sharp and bright and burning, and Iris gasped, her hands flying to his shoulders, her nails digging into his skin. But the pain was already transforming, shifting into something else, something overwhelming and glorious and utterly right. Pleasure cascaded through her in waves, pooling in her belly, spreading through her limbs like liquid fire. The mate bond exploded open between them. She felt him, not just his body against hers, but his soul, his essence, everything he was and had ever been. She felt his love for her, vast and fierce and absolutely unconditional. She felt his fear, not of battle, not of death, but of losing her, of failing to protect her. She felt his pride in her strength, his awe at her power, his desperate, consuming need to be worthy of her. Iris. His voice resonated in her mind, intimate and overwhelming. My mate. My heart. My everything. She was crying again, but these were different tears. Tears of joy, of completion, of coming home to a place she hadn't known she'd been searching for. His fangs withdrew, and he pressed his lips to the wound, licking gently at the blood that welled there. "You're marked," he breathed against her skin. "You're mine." Not yet. She felt the power rising in her again, not the silver fire, but something softer, something that was purely her. Her wolf pressed against her consciousness, and her teeth ached with the need to complete what they had started. "Iris." She rose up before he could protest, her mouth finding the junction of his neck and shoulder, and she bit down. His blood flooded her tongue, rich and wild and tasting of forest and moonlight, and Marcus roared, a sound of pleasure so intense it bordered on pain. His arms wrapped around her like iron bands, crushing her against his chest, and she felt the bond complete itself in a rush of sensation that left her breathless. Mine. She poured everything she was into that single word. My mate, my king, my heart. Yours, he answered, and the word was a vow. Always and forever, yours. They collapsed together onto the pillows, tangled in each other's arms, the completed bond settling into their souls like it had always belonged there. Iris could feel his heartbeat as if it were her own. She could feel his thoughts, his emotions, his absolute devotion to her. Mine, she whispered against his chest. Yours, he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. They lay there for a long time, just breathing together, feeling the settled peace of the bond humming between them. Spring came slowly to the mountains, but it came. 3 months had passed since Alexander's death. 3 months of healing, of learning to trust, of watching the mate bond deepen into something unshakable. The coronation was held on the first day of the new season, when the snow had melted from the palace grounds and the first green shoots were pushing up through the earth. Iris stood on the great dais, her hand in Marcus's, the crown of moonstone and silver gleaming on her brow. Luna Queen, the crowds roared, Luna Queen of the Wildfire Pack. The noble who had called her damaged goods knelt at the front of the assembly, his jaw still crooked from where Marcus had broken it. Behind him, the rest of the court, those who had whispered about the rejected Omega, who had questioned Marcus's judgment in taking her in, pressed their foreheads to the floor in submission. Iris surveyed them all with the calm that came from absolute certainty. She was not damaged. She was not broken. She was the daughter of the Lunar Queens, the mate of the Alpha King, and, as she had discovered just a week ago, the mother of a new life growing beneath her heart. This time, there would be no poison, no betrayal, only joy. "Rise," she commanded, and they obeyed. That night, in their chambers, Marcus knelt before her and pressed his lips to the gentle swell of her stomach. "I was thinking about names," he murmured against her skin. "For the baby." Iris ran her fingers through his dark hair, smiling down at him. "Were you? If it's a girl, I thought, Aurora, for the light that brought you back to me. And if it's a boy?" He looked up at her, his expression soft with love. "Then you choose. He'll be half yours after all." She laughed, and the sound was bright and free and utterly without fear. "Half mine? He'll be entirely mine. You just contributed the raw materials." Marcus grinned, rising to pull her into his arms. "Fair enough. He'll be entirely yours, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn the right to call him mine." "The rest of your life is a long time," she said, but she was smiling as she said it. "Not long enough." He kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. "Not nearly long enough to show you how much I love you." The mate bond hummed between them, warm and settled and absolutely unshakable. Through it, Iris felt his joy, his contentment, his fierce determination to give her the life she deserved. And she felt her own emotions flowing back to him. Her gratitude, her wonder, her absolute certainty that she had finally found her home. Outside, the spring sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The kingdom was at peace. The threat was ended. And Iris Blackwood, Luna Queen of the Wildfire Pack, daughter of the Lunar Queens, mate of the Alpha King, had never been happier. She was exactly where she was meant to be.